Good afternoon. Today is Friday, the 24th of July, 2026, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to have Patrick Henningsen with me in the studio. We're also joined by Basil Valentine, and I'm very pleased to say that Basil has a special guest today. We'll leave that as a surprise. Now, we've got what I think is a very, very important news today. We're going to be focusing on the new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham, and and having a deep look at what he's up to. It's pretty incredible. I think some really serious things are unfolding and will follow through from his policies, but more on that. Patrick, you're going to be mentioning Burnham's bombs, and of course, in comes this latest Labour Prime Minister. Is that going to produce peace? Absolutely not, because he's going to pave the way for an easier access to the UK military facilities for the Americans to conduct their bombing operations. We're going to have a little look at Rupert Lowe's reaction to what's actually happening in the country, the breakdown of the country. That'll be part of a second section on Andy Burnham. Patrick, you're going to be having a look at UK fuel poverty, which is a really extraordinary statement because we should be flush with fuel, but it depends on what policy is being followed. We're going to be having a look at some events in Gaza, and we're also going to be focusing on the BBC accounts. So we'll get straight off with reporting on Andy Burnham, and of course, no better place to go. I've just got to say nicely, William, we're short of thank you. So this is the BBC report, and if we follow through on this, I'm just going to have to break the flow of the news slightly. William, we need a device. If you can just provide that for us. Okay, so the key thing here is that the reports are now starting of Burnham spending his day working in the northern branch of Number 10. Now, I think what's happening here, the constitutional system of government in UK is being turned on its head. There's been no real prior announcement about this. We're just seeing this dribbled into the press itself. And the BBC report talking about up to 300 civil servants ready to go to join the location of so-called Downing Street in the northwest. Now, this is a major change to the country's constitutional structure. There's no way it's been dreamt up by Andy Burnham in just a few minutes. So this has clearly been well planned, and therefore we can ask the question, has this man just been voted into power as an unfortunate situation, or has something else happened? So if we follow through on this report, one thing the BBC does tell us is that there are strategic decisions about devolution and local economic growth, which are going to move from the Treasury and the Ministry of Housing. This is all going to go to Number 10 of the North. So this is absolutely massive change in policy in this country. And Andy Burnham is going to be handling this not under the eye of the elected MPs in Westminster, but within the constraints of his enclave in the North. There's an additional part of this report, if we can pop it up on screen, please. And that is that Number 10 North will operate out of Heron House in central Manchester in the same building which houses offices for the intelligence services, GCHQ. So think about what happened during COVID lockdown when the government was prepared to use the military 77 Brigade to interfere with anybody who was daring to challenge the government's policies. Now we've got Andy Burnham withdrawing from accountability from the general public and operating in the same building where a revitalised GCHQ component in that building is going to be looking at ever more control over dissent in the country. Now, this is one of the statements that Burnham actually made. He said, for 40 years, power and resources have been sucked into the centre, and too many communities have felt forgotten without the attention and investment they deserve. they deserve. This is very, very dangerous language. If we pop the next one on screen, it's very deceptive because it leads people to believe that the government is going to serve local people. But what's actually happening here is centralized control is being brought down right to the lowest level. I think this is so dangerous, Patrick, and of course it's being presented in a very relaxed way, as though there's nothing really to see.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I mean, it's just another unelected prime minister. There seems to be quite a few of those in recent years.
Yes, absolutely. And this key statement by Burnham, the days of Whitehall resisting devolution are over for good. Now, the resistance to devolution has largely come from the population of UK. So this is a gross understatement of the emerging plan, which is to destroy the United Kingdom in its present forms, because what Burnham is going to do is he's going to reorganise everything to do with the Constitution in a way that will destroy the powers of that Constitution. Now, against the background of all those serious issues, let's have a look at how the BBC reports what the UK column has just reported.
It's not here, though this pub in Manchester city centre has changed its front door, more in hope than expectation. It's not Salford Lads Club, made famous by the Smiths, though Andy Burnham did choose it to launch his last mayoral campaign. And it definitely won't be on the cobbles of Coronation Street. But it is on Albert Square in Manchester. This is Heron House. It's already being used as offices for the intelligence agency GCHQ, and now it's also the new northern branch of Downing Street. Andy Burnham says he wants to base himself here one day a week. The new PM not so much working from home as working from Manchester. And hundreds of civil servants will end up working here full time. Many currently working in London are being offered thousands of pounds to relocate. It may not stay here forever. New government offices are being built just outside the city centre. Andy Burnham sees this as a long-term project. He's told his team that Number 10 North isn't a gimmick.
So, Patrick, for me, that real, as it's called now, utterly outrageous, no investigation from the BBC, no real understanding from that young reporter about what Andy Burnham is doing, no comment on the constitutional issues. That is outrageous propaganda featuring Coronation Street and making a joke of the building in Albert Square. It's targeted behavioural insights, applied political psychology on the population of this country by the BBC.
I just want you to think it's totally normal. This is just absolutely normal. Let's just get on
with the business.
With this new change, even though we didn't tell you anything about it. So what about the foreign policy front? What about the wars? Are we going to see any change?
No,
that's what we'll be talking about in a moment.
I'll bring you over to that, excuse me, in a moment. But let's just reinforce this business about Andy Burnham's government sat alongside GCHQ. This is a report from the GCHQ website about Manchester and the Northwest, our secure site in Albert Square in the heart of the city of Manchester and Northwest. And basically, they go on to boast about the fact that it was opened in 2019. It's the government's newest high-tech offices, and they're going to be contributing to a hub for innovation and technical expertise. And this is going to be sucking in civilians, particularly young people, and even children have been visiting this facility. And of course, as usual, we should expect the King to have been there. So here's the report on His Majesty the King paying a visit to these GCHQ Northwest offices, where it says the monarch met with staff and local school children. So again, the emphasis on this is, well, this is all very nice. We're just the security and intelligence services working along and through and with government, and the King has been there to put his stamp on it. But if that's not bad enough, the other thing we can report is our old friend, the political charity Common Purpose, very big in Manchester. Here's a report from 4th of October, I think it's 2023. University of Manchester Partnership spokes, quote, hope for tomorrow's leaders. But if we look into the detail of that report, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, closed the Common Purpose Programme, sharing his vision for a cleaner, greener Greater Manchester and taking the time to really listen to what the participants had to say. If you look into the text in detail, there's one focus, and that's driving home UN sustainable goals. So the smokescreen, Patrick, is don't worry about us. We're going to protect you all. We're going to look after you. We're going to keep you safe, protect you from the sun. The reality, I think, is going to be more war.
Well, let's just take a look here. I mean, how long has he been in office, Brian? A couple of days? The dirt's not even on the rug. I mean, which number 10 are we going to talk about? There's one. There's now two.
There's only one now, and that is number 10 North, Patrick, I think. Yeah.
So anyway, I'm disoriented, so I can't imagine what people are like. So here it is. He's hit the ground running, let's just say, when it comes to all the various wars going on in the world here. Bombs away Burnham, we're calling it here. And really, this is the sort of vibe we're getting right here. If you look below there, you see those eyes? Those look familiar, don't they?
They do.
That's kind of the vibe we're getting here. So the unelected prime minister is, just a seamless foreign policy. Let's just take a look at this. Well, look, the U.S. bombs Iran from a UK airbase for the first time under Andy Burnham. So Donald Trump's, he's given Trump permission to use the RAF airfield for defensive strikes. I'm miffed, Brian. Can you help me with this? What are defensive strikes? What's the difference between offensive bombing and defensive bombing?
It's offensive. It is offensive. Both the use of the term defensive strike, that is offensive, and what they're actually doing on the ground is offensive. The manipulation of the language is to actually confuse people. This language is being deliberately chosen because it interferes with people's cognitive process and their ability to assimilate what is actually happening. So this is a psychological attack in order to defend the fact that we are now participating in this war. There's no question.
I mean, you'll bring this back up on screen here. I mean, this is A-grade Orwellian propaganda,
yes,
basically.
Absolutely.
This is double speak, news speak, whichever speak you want to call it here. But here's the rub, right, Brian? Breaking. Iran's IRGC has warned that any British military bases used by the U.S. to launch attacks on Tehran will become legitimate targets. So by participating in this, why would you have to? I mean, they could fly these missions from a number of other countries.
Correct.
Why does Britain need to be involved and have a target painted on it? Because that's really what we're talking about, right?
Because we've never not been involved, Patrick. We've clearly been involved in the whole planning process for what's taking place in the Middle East.
So the fact that this point has come up, Brian, as luck would have it, 2 weeks ago, I was in Iran and at a press conference with the chair of their National Security and Foreign Policy Committee, the parliamentary committee. So this is the highest ranking national security official in Iran.
Yeah.
And I asked him this very question. And as luck would have it, thank you to my colleague, Dmitry Laskari, we actually had this on tape. Let's have a listen.
Thank you. And briefly, the GCC countries, when Iran retaliated at the beginning of the 40-day war and struck U.S. bases across the Persian Gulf, in terms of the laws of war and the Geneva Conventions, Iran is within its right to retaliate against the source of the threat. Yeah. And that's why the world community did not really push back very hard. However, what is the difference between the U.S. launching attacks from the GCC and the U.S. launching attacks from Germany, from Italy, from Greece, from Romania, from Cyprus, etc., the EU, NATO? Is Iran, how do they consider these two things? Or is there no difference?
ما هر اقدامی رو و هر حمله رو مبدأ اون حمله رو مورد اقدام قرار میدیم.
Any action, any attack on Iran the result is the same. The origin of hostilities will be targeted.
و اینو بارها هم گفتیم.
And we have always said time and again.
اگر پایگاه آمریکایی رو در منطقه میزنیم به خاطر اینکه مبدأ حمله اونجاست.
If we are targeting the U.S. bases in the region, the reason is that their bases is in the region.
مبدأ حمله و تهاجم به ما هر کجا باشه مورد اقدام قاطع و پشیمان ساز قرار میگیره.
The origin of hostilities on Iran. Wherever it is in the world, it will be targeted decisively. With a frequent inducting response, we have said time and again.
تأکیدم میکنیم.
And we emphasize again.
هر کسی، هر کشوری، هر نظام سیاسی بخواد موقعیتی در اختیار آمریکایی‌ها قرار بده، این در حکم همراهی
that they want to
برای حمله
or facilitate U.S. attack on Iran, we consider it as a kind of their complicit.
حق مسلم ماست.
It's our natural rights.
حق مشروع ماست.
Legitimate rights.
و علل قاعده دارای منطق دفاعی هست.
It has a defense logic behind it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that was at a press conference in Mashhad, and so he said any country, right? Any country.
Which is logical, because if you are attacked by another country, you are going to consider the option of retaliating against that particular country and wherever they are launching weapon systems from.
So it's not a cost-free participation exercise by the UK by enabling U.S. You have to remember, where does Britain stand on this in terms of international law? I mean, this is an undeclared war of aggression against Iran, started by the U.S. and Israel. Does that come into the equation at all? How on earth could this be defensive bombing raids by the U.S.? So the risk is incredible. You know, so
absolutely.
And we could say the same about Russia and Ukraine, and we have discussed that risk as well. But yet again, painting targets on European, and in this case, Britain. In exact same way the U.S. painted targets on the Gulf states.
Yes, and they paid for it.
And they paid, and we're all paying for it in terms of energy, which we'll talk about later. But it's extraordinary, Brian. And why can't we have a serious debate about this nationally here? So the reaction, of course, is already underway. The UK is ready to defend itself after the Iranian threat over U.S. bases. So the UK has allowed the U.S. to launch defensive operations with British bases hosting American planes, but has refused to help in offensive operations. So they've covered themselves, Brian. I mean, well, I'm laughing here, but
it's only the language that is the attempt to cover them, because when you push this nonsense language aside and you use the correct terminology to describe what they're doing, what they are doing becomes very clear. This is offensive operations where we are working hand in glove with the Americans.
Anyway, we'll just round this out here. And just another salient point, if we bring this back up on screen, at the moment here. Spokesperson for the British government said, our armed forces are ready to keep the United Kingdom safe from any kind of attacks, whether it's on our soil or abroad, 24/7. So what's the UK going to do that the United States hasn't already done to Iran?
Well, the answer to that is nothing. But even that statement that you've had on screen, Patrick, is a lie in itself, because at the moment we have no nuclear attack submarines at sea, and therefore the nuclear deterrent itself is not being protected as it should be. This is open knowledge now. So that statement is complete fraud on the nation. And for the Guardian to repeat it verbatim is astonishingly bad journalism.
And here's the IRGC giving a little history lesson, accusing the British monarchy regime of being the primary cause of hardships in our region, with a black record of partitioning Islamic nations, widespread massacres, imposing despotic regimes, and organizing the occupation of Palestine. Hard to argue there. And here is the U.S. Threats. We're expecting a massive escalation from the United States. Donald Trump says the Iranians haven't received enough pain yet, and claims that they want to negotiate but are not ready to make a deal, contradicting Iran's comprehensive no negotiations policy with the U.S. here. So we could follow the mixed messages from Washington all day long and end up nowhere. But suffice to say, this is on the record here from the U.S. president that any ship that is fired on in the strait by Iran will be met with one bridge or one power plant and so forth. So the U.S. is putting out a declaration of war crimes here, civilian infrastructure, which they're threatening. And again, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters the president's approach to the war was a head for an eye, not an eye for an eye, a head for an eye. So they're adopting the Israeli maxims, if you noticed, which means one of our soldiers means 100 of your civilians kind of thing. So a head for an eye. Extraordinary stuff. So here's the bottom line. Let's just do just quickly to wrap this up. There he is. He's looking quite light on his feet, isn't it? They tend to be like that when they're not elected. Rishi Sunak had that little bounce, didn't he? And does remind me a little bit of a young Mandelson. But I digress. Here, no change in policy on Israel's genocide in Gaza, Israel's expansion pogroms in the West Bank, Israel's illegal invasion of Lebanon, Israel's illegal invasion of Syria's Golan Heights, the U.S. and Israel's illegal war in Iran, and the U.S. and NATO's escalation of the war in Ukraine. Absolutely new management, but no change in policy. So it's really a case, Brian, of new management, same as the old management.
Indeed.
So there we are. And just quickly, a thumbs up there, just to keep it corporate.
But Andy Burnham is now a prime minister who's working from his own enclave, number 10 in the north. So the checks and balances that Westminster would produce on a normal prime minister, by the fact that they are visible, that the rumour mill will be leaking what that prime minister is up to, it's all changed with Andy Burnham. Andy's got GCHQ working within the same building,
cocooned by a layer of intelligence and spooks, and it's bizarre to say the least.
Bizarre. Basil, let's move over to you, and I'm delighted for you to bring in our guest today.
Yes, thanks, gentlemen. My guest today is Ben Timperley, former Labour Party activist and Momentum member. Ben has been researching corruption in the Labour Party and the machinations that go on behind the scenes, and digging deep into the policy changes that we've seen from what under Starmer was, apart from anything else, arguably the most authoritarian government that Britain has ever seen. Welcome to the programme, Ben.
Thank you very much for having me. Much appreciated.
Now, much has been made of Burnham's claim to be dropping digital ID, but the fact is the infrastructure is still there, and the rollout of facial recognition software continues apace. So am I right in saying that the Home Secretary who stays in post, panopticon of control, is likely to remain completely unchanged under Burnham?
I think you're absolutely right. I think the as you call it, the panopticon of control is absolutely still going to remain in place, and it has been in place for many years. I think the announcement that digital ID is going to be rolled back is essentially a smokescreen. It's a way of going, oh, there's not a problem here, we don't have to worry about this. When in reality, the Online Safety Act and other legislation for many years has been in play. I would say since around 2018, and much of this legislation has been in play that allows the government to have overarching control of online narratives, of information security, and basically giving them the ability to reach into people's private lives, extract the information they want, and use it as they see fit. It's essentially a blackmail scam that the government has carte blanche on and total control of.
And indeed, Burnham embedding himself up there with GCHQ is particularly concerning. We should all know by now, Ben, that Tony Blair was, and in all probability still is, a security state asset. And personally, I think Starmer may well have been the same. Burnham appears to be a more honest broker than either of those two. It's certainly an extremely low bar. But the hidden hand of the national security state looks certain to continue playing a major part in how Britain's governed, doesn't it?
It really does. I think there has to be a lot of context here that is very important that most people will be completely unaware of. Recently, UK Column hosted an excellent article by David Miller regarding the rise of a spook, an MI6 spook, to the Director General position of the Homeland Security Group. And as part of the analysis in that article, he essentially posited the idea that MI6 is essentially put in place a power grab across government under what's known as the fusion doctrine. That they're essentially putting in place what's known as whole of society resiliency. So their idea is that there must be no weak links in the governmental chain, national, local, regional, all the way through. There has to be essentially a system of control and protection as they see it. Nice government you have there, be shame if something happened to it. That's the way they view it, and that's exactly what they're doing. And if you look at GCHQ, MI5, MI6, they're all intertwined along with the various other intelligence services that are held in place by individual departments. We have a real problem in the UK, and that the public is grossly unaware of and underinformed about the way that these systems, these organisations, and the individuals within them work. Roughly around, I'd say it was around 2011, 2010, it was recognised within relevant circles of government that what they needed to achieve after the National Security Capability Review in 2018, but they recognised it a bit before then, that the cost of maintaining this whole of society resiliency, as they call it, was prohibitive. There was a huge amount of money that was needed to do it, huge amount of access and essentially control over digital systems and private systems. So they recognised they couldn't do it by themselves as government. So essentially what they did was they roped in with various deals the private sector, especially the tech platforms, to put them in a position where they had access to these networks, they had access to digital platforms, and they were allowed to essentially build this resiliency system where they could use private money to reinforce narratives, to create political situations that were completely under their control. So the inexplicable rise of Andy Burnham, just like the inexplicable rise of Keir Starmer, it starts taking on a different context when you look at the level of control that these organisations and the people behind them and the funders behind them, they have this level of input which is unprecedented and extraordinary in terms of British history. There has never been anything like this level of societal resiliency, as they call it, in the history of the UK. And it really is frightening, the level of reach and power that these people have. Andy Burnham is literally a puppet. He is a face mask for what is going on behind the scenes, and it is absolutely no surprise at all that he would position his number 10 of the North in the GCHQ office in Manchester. That makes absolute sense that he would do that.
That's right, Ben. I've long since said that only certain people are allowed to become Prime Minister, and Jeremy Corbyn obviously wasn't one of them. The shadowy Labour Together was supposed to have gone out of the window with Morgan McSweeney, but that's not really the case, is it? We've got James Purnell at the heart of government, and what role is Josh Simons, the chap who fell on his sword and, of course, was responsible for trying to rake up all that muck on investigative journalists? What about Labour Together under Burnham?
I think Labour Together are, as a brand, a busted flush. They've rebranded for a reason. To think, I think it was Think Labour or something along those lines, something very inane. They've rebranded, but in terms of what they're actually there to do, that hasn't changed. What most people won't recognise is that Labour Together was essentially a sister organisation to the CCDH, which was the Centre for Countering Digital Hate. And if you look at the directors, as I did in 2022, we find a man called Simon Clarke, who was the chair of the CCDH. Simon Clarke basically is a private sector spook. he used to work in the agencies. He was involved with various Whitehall-based think tanks, which are essentially private spook organisations, as well as the other people in the CCDH, Imran Ahmed and various others. These are all players that are attached to intelligence agencies. And for Morgan McSweeney to be a double hatter between the CCDH and Labour together is absolutely no surprise. Now, obviously, various people have moved on into different organisations, and it's worth, for those of you at home who are feeling curious, looking at where they have gone and the jobs that they have taken up, especially Simon Clarke. It will tell you what their priorities are. Their priorities really are about delivering Prosperity 2030. The agenda which has been in play for some time, that came out of UCL, University College London, this agenda has been played out in Greater Manchester under the Greater Manchester Combined Authority for some time now, and that agenda is essentially about pulling in place a whole ream of policies which we're seeing, which is essentially doing what was done to the NHS, which is making it public at the point of purchase, but behind the scenes just a glorified PFI scheme. And we're going to see that across energy, water, public transport. We're going to see it further in healthcare. We're going to see it across different areas of government. And Labour Together is essentially the state's hand in the till of the Labour Party. And you'll find it in Reform, you'll find it in the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrats. They have versions of these organisations in every single party. And all of them report to two heads, which is the state intelligence authorities and also the private NGO, what I call philanthro-spook organisations, which fund them.
Ben Timperley, thank you so much for joining us today on UK Column. And it's great that you can join us too for the extra programme after 2 o'clock. Brian, over to you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to Ben. Really interesting analysis. And it's going to be really good to have a longer discussion in UK Column Extra at the end of today's news. Let's counter that deep analysis focused around Andy Burnham with a little look at an interview that Rupert Lowe conducted just a few days ago. But it gives us an insight into his mind. I have two clips. We may just have time, I think, for one of them. But let's have a look at what Rupert Lowe had to say about what has been attacking the United Kingdom.
Well, the history of it is that basically, as you probably know, Britain, after the war, decided they were going to play a part in Europe, a bigger part in Europe. Well, our elite did, the British elite. And to do that, they had to basically diminish the power of the nation state, and they had to head towards this European superstate, which is the EU, the genesis of which was obviously a monopoly.
Why did they have to diminish the power of the nation to do that?
Because I think Britain was a proud nation state. We with the American help, we'd won the war, and we hadn't been invaded or conquered, which most of Europe had been. So you'd had mass dislocation in Europe. Huge numbers of people had been dislocated and pushed all over Europe. And I think the socialists, I was in the European Parliament, so I spent a brief time as an MEP, a member of the European Parliament, when we finally...
Okay. What is fascinating about Rupert Lowe is that historically, he's now talking about some really important things. He's talking about how the UK got involved with the European Union, the manipulation of all of that process, and then finally the fact that we had immense cross-border migration, which has caused huge problems to all the Western countries, and indeed in the home countries from which the migrants have come. So he is delving into some very accurate and appropriate analysis as to what has been taking place that is UK column, that is for the UK under pressure. But effectively, he's not gripping the immediacy of what is happening, for example, around Andy Burnham. So it's as though he's working 10 years out of step. And if we can just try the second clip, please, William, because that one is a shorter one. Let's follow it through a little bit more.
So it really accelerated after 97 when a lot of the legislation that Tony Blair and his cohorts passed, such as the Human Rights Act, which embeds within it the ECHR, He created the Supreme Court. They passed laws like the Equalities Act, and there are a raft of other legal acts they passed which effectively empowered a multicultural society, which in some ways I think damaged the interests of the British people. So,
and you think this is on purpose. And this is my point, is what is the benefit for them to be joined up with the rest of Europe? Is it just purely financial? Is it a power-based strategy where if you can diminish the quality of life for people and institute more laws and put more restrictions on them, you can control them easier, and it's less pushback for the politicians, less pushback for the people that are in charge?
Basically, yes. I think it's the age-old battle between individualism and collectivism.
So my comment to this is these are very low-key responses. What is actually building very quickly in this country is a dictatorship where we've got the government and the surveillance systems and the services and the security services working hand in glove. So if Rupert Lowe is to get a grip of what's actually happening in the country, seems to me, Patrick, he's got to toughen up his understanding or expand his understanding of how quickly this beast is system is being created and exactly how ruthless it is. And to me, he just doesn't seem to be gripping it.
10 years out of step is about accurate.
10 years out of step, yeah, absolutely. So if we just follow through this section very quickly, I just wanted to make sure that we say to our audience that the UK column has been reporting accurately on this stuff. One of the things that Rupert Lowe mentioned was that it was really Brexit without us coming out of the European Union. That was Brexit without the exit, which UK column warned about. And we were absolutely correct about that. And I want to contrast Mr. Lowe's performance by bringing on this lady, Madeline Hunt. She's the General Secretary of the Heritage Party. And on her Substack, she's written a truly excellent analysis of the mayor's control system and the Burnham blueprint. This is going into detail with exactly what he's doing, what he's trying to do with the creation of the city-states, the economic development zones, and mayors with total control. So this lady, who lived in Poland originally under the communist system, she absolutely knows what's coming. And as she points out there, they are seeking really to neutralize local councillors. And why? Because local councillors ultimately hold the solution to stopping this policy coming to the lowest level. If you'd like to see more of Madeline Hunt, then have a look on the UK column for The Twilight of Democracy, where I did an interview with her, very interesting and predictive interview back in March 2024. And also she hosted a panel actually having a look at the enemy that was attacking the country. Now, to finish this section, I just want to show a clip of an interview that I've conducted with a gentleman called Martin Brighton. That will be streamed relatively shortly. We'll let you know when. But I just want to share this clip with our audience today because...
I do indeed, yes. The memory is when it kicked off and just coming home one afternoon. We're talking about nearly 30 years ago now. And my wife was crying on the settee. And she'd been told that she wasn't going to be involved in the community centre anymore. She was no longer to be a volunteer. They were going to take her clients, the playgroup, and the building. And none of this was legal. But she wouldn't know because someone from the council said it was all a done deal. Now, at that time, I was acting as an auditor. So I started asking the questions, where's all this coming from? And it was at that time, when I started to dig deep, that I realised that from central government top down, they were appropriating European funds and using it for their own agenda, not for the benefit of the people. And if anyone got in the way, they were removed.
This is truly an extraordinary interview because, in a very mild manner, this man talks about 20 plus years of work challenging fraud and corruption and bullying within the city authority system. And I can tell our audience that a few months ago, his home was raided, all of his computers and phones taken because he'd moved on in his investigation into corruption from what was happening with big money inside cities such as Sheffield, for example, to having a look at the state's covering up of the abuse of children. So he has not received any of that equipment back from the police. And really, the interview will spell out the ruthlessness by which this new system, which Andy Burnham is clearly leading, the ruthlessness of the system and what it will do to anybody who challenges it. So do watch out for that interview with Martin Brighton. Now, let's move on with the adverts. And as always, we encourage people to join the UK column as members because we can only do what we do with your financial support. So if you click on the arrow, you can go to the page to make a donation or a monthly membership, annual membership, or a lifetime membership. All and any support is very helpful. So have a look at what you can do. And also, of course, you can make purchases through the shop, not least to get the latest The Column magazine, which has gone down exceptionally well. And we've had a lot of feedback from people saying they're amazed at how we can produce such a quality of a magazine for the price. So have a look at that. We've also, of course, got our 20th anniversary coming up. We're going to be announcing the speaker lineup and the titles of the talks in the next couple of days. So watch out for that. But this is going to be a really excellent event. And of course, we got the whole weekend to be with our members and supporters in order to be talking face to face about what is now happening in the country. So tonight at 7 p.m., we've got Germ Warfare, Tony Heller, Dismantling Global Warming Hysterics, which seems a very important title. We've also got Silk and Steel tonight, Chinese History at 9 p.m. And this is having a look at China's first empire, and the fall of Gwyn Biggins. So have a look at that and see what that has to say. Now, this is going to bring us into, I think it's back to Basil. Is that correct?
No, I think we had a UK fuel poverty. Yeah, we're going to be looking just at that issue here. And we'll bring this up on screen here. Big issue, of course, for everybody, Brian, is the cost of living crisis. And so let's just take a look at that for a moment. Now, you're probably wondering, what does Germany have to do with life in the UK? Well, Germany's currently paying 5 times more for gas after ditching Russian imports. Nord Stream pipeline, anybody? Germany's now paying 5 times as much for imported gas than it did before abandoning its long-term Russian supply contracts, part of the EU sanctions, the Berliner Zeitung has reported here. And this is the important bit, Brian. Long-term contracts with Moscow were not vulnerable to external shocks, market fluctuations, etc. Berlin now has to rely on the volatile international energy market, as does the UK, which is reeling from the de facto closure of the Straits of Hormuz during the ongoing conflict between the U.S., Iran, Russia, Ukraine as well. And the reporting on this here. So let's bring this to the UK, Brian. This is a great website here, which we're following, End Fuel Poverty Coalition. This is a UK-based organization here. And energy bills rising 13.5% as households face a difficult summer. And now, some of us have been given demands to pay £1,200, £1,400 out of the blue. Because of the rise in rates, we'll bring this up here, adding an extra £221 to the average household, pushing it to £1,862 per year. This is even wearing the extra sweater, Brian.
Yes.
Okay, and not using your central heating. So, but let's look a little closer at that. And this is exactly as they say. With the German market, global market disruptions and conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine has driven up the cost of natural gas, which frequently sets overall wholesale electricity pricing. The UK is totally over-reliant on natural gas to power its grid, Brian. So you're probably wondering, most people say, well, foreign policy, Andy Burnham, what's that got to do with me? Bring this back up on screen, if you could, William. That's exactly what it has to do. Those policies are directly affecting whether you can afford to use electricity or gas in your home. These exact policies. The government is pushing for war. They've abandoned diplomacy. They're escalating against Russia. They're escalating against Iran, as we've shown here. So it gets back to where we were before. This matters, Brian.
Absolutely.
All of these policies, which this new government is basically backstopping, is going to mean you're going to pay more for everything because they're doing nothing to change the fundamentals that are causing the volatility in the energy market. So when we talk about foreign policy, everybody, when we talk about Iran and Russia, Ukraine, this has to do with our bottom line.
This is a very good point, Patrick, because talking about the wars overseas, there are many people who think, but this is happening overseas. Well, no, there's a direct impact on the population in UK. Population is suffering in this country and is going to suffer more as a result of these bellicose policies by the government and the likes of the new Prime Minister.
And I'm sure we'll talk more about this during the extra segment.
Okay. So, Basil, it is over to you. And the subject is back on initially Gaza.
Yes, Brian, thank you. I mean, one of the hallmarks of the Gaza Holocaust since the outset has been the continual downplaying of the scale of the horror by corporate media, which has ignored the massacres at every available opportunity. That's more true than ever now that we are 9 months into the so-called ceasefire. But the truth is, there hasn't been a ceasefire. Israel continues to kill people every day, including today, as we can see in these pictures from Gaza this morning. On Monday, at least 12 Palestinians, including 6 members of one family, were murdered in 3 separate strikes in the Gaza Strip. Attacks continue across northern Gaza. At least 6 people, including women and children, have been killed over the last 48 hours alone. The latest victims include Qusay Abu Baid and another child who were killed in front of their home. The UN Human Rights Office this week condemned the recent intensification of Israeli military air attacks, which have slaughtered at least 57 Palestinians in the week between the 13th and the 20th of July, in residential buildings, including women and children, a tent camp for displaced families, and other very crowded areas. Now, it's worth remembering that during this period, since the ceasefire, Hamas has not killed any Israeli civilians or any Israeli soldiers since the so-called ceasefire agreement was signed. But the Israelis have now killed more Palestinians than Israeli civilians died on October the 7th, quite apart from the hundreds of thousands who, of course, were slaughtered between October the 7th and this fake ceasefire. Now, the October 2025 ceasefire agreement stipulated that the battle lines in place at the time of the deal would remain frozen until later phases of the agreement were implemented. That provision paved the way for the creation of the so-called Yellow Line, a unilateral Israeli demarcation designating vast areas of Gaza as no-go zones and barring Palestinians from accessing large parts of their land, including all the viable agricultural land. At the time that deal was signed, Israeli forces controlled around 53% of the enclave. Since then, The Israeli military has expanded that yellow line, effectively bringing around 70% of Gaza under its control and forcing Palestinians into less than half, to more than a third of the territory's land area. And that yellow line is now being dug with a bulldozer. Under the terms of the agreement, the subsequent phases were meant to include a gradual Israeli withdrawal from the entire Gaza Strip, but that looks extremely unlikely at this point. Israeli forces have also carried out near daily home demolitions in another breach of the ceasefire. Also, under the agreement, Israel was required to ease restrictions on deliveries of life essentials and allow up to 600 trucks a day carrying food, fuel, medical supplies and shelter materials into Gaza. However, UN data shows those commitments have not been met, with rights groups warning that continued restrictions have prolonged the humanitarian crisis and severely restricted relief operations. By the end of April, only just over 4,500 aid trucks had entered the enclave, a mere 25% of the 18,000 trucks stipulated under the agreement. That's a daily average of just over 200 trucks, which is far below the agreed threshold. The amount of food allowed is way below the level needed to sustain the population. And Israel has also excluded much needed shelter materials, tents, mobile homes, as well as essential medicines, medical equipment and fuel. The result is a record number of orphans, miscarriages and associated diseases, including outbreaks of chickenpox in children. Now, an analysis by the New York Times back in January revealed that Israel had demolished 2,500 buildings in the first 3 months of the agreement, a rate of demolition that has continued apace. And a new Oxfam report says human development has been set back by 77 years. The EU World Bank Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment report in April said it would take an estimated $71.4 billion to recover. All this has prompted activists to launch the They Lied to You campaign, as we can see now in this clip.
They lied to you. When they told you the war's over, they lied to you. And here's the truth.
اللي صار احنا كنا على الشارع، في ناس مدنيين نازحين، هذا الشارع بحيا حوالي يمكن فوق ال 300 شخص في المنطقة. فجأة صار عندنا صاروخ في العمارة، لا حد مدري ولا حد ولا تحذير ولا حاجة، خبطوها من غير ما حد، في مدنيين، في أطفال، في نساء وفي بنات تصوبات وفي شهداء خير الله. وحسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل، واللي بيقولوا يا عم الحرب خلصت ما خلصتش الحرب شغالة وما زالت. وحسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل وبس.
خبطوا الدار يعني دوري يعني خبطوها صاروخ، كنت لسه طالع من الحمام لسه بتحمم، هلا خبطوا الدار يعني. صرنا نجي نخاف الناس اللي جوا نطلعهم. يعني اشواء على الارض يعني نسوان واولاد ميتين يعني وسلام كبار.
Following the complete evisceration of the Gaza Strip, Donald Trump started his fraudulent Ponzi scheme dubbed the Board of Peace. Like some macabre game show, he said it was $1 billion buy-in for permanent membership, but unsurprisingly, almost no countries have actually put any money in the bank, and it remains toothless. Instead, they held this sham ceremony in Sharm el-Sheikh, where an assortment of world leaders told Donald Trump how wonderful he is. And then they put in charge of former UN official and Bulgarian Defense and Foreign Minister Nikolai Mladenov. That's him on the left of the slide, along with Blair, of course, and Jared Kushner. Now, Mladenov was well known to Palestinians. He'd met with Khalil al-Hayya and others during his time at the UN. And I think Palestinians initially felt that he was a better bet than Tony Blair, although Blair apparently remains deeply involved. However, from the moment Mladenov got involved, it was very clear that the Israelis had gotten to him, and you can see him there shaking hands with the executioner-in-chief, Netanyahu. What Mladenov and his cronies are trying to do is put an international stamp of legitimacy on the genocide and ethnic cleansing, because, of course, Trump managed to obtain a UN Security Council resolution, probably the most shameful act in the entire history of the United Nations, endorsing this so-called Board of Peace. And remember that Trump remains the head of the Board of Peace even after he's left office, and it gives him the right to deploy a privatized armed force of which he is the commander. Now, Mladenov is working with Ariel Lightstone, a US official who, unsurprisingly, is an absolutely fanatical Israel firster. And the two of them sent a letter to the Palestinian Technical Committee that's theoretically supposed to take over actual governance of Gaza, basically saying that if Hamas doesn't agree to disarm immediately, which was never part of the original ceasefire agreement, then they will have to let Israel resume the genocide, which, sadly, it appears, is precisely what has happened. The underlying aim, of course, the long-term aim, is the complete ethnic cleansing of Gaza, as is freely admitted by the likes of Israeli Heritage Minister Amichai Eliyahu, who said on Wednesday that the government's ultimate goal is indeed to regain control of the Gaza Strip and establish Israeli settlements there. That's according to the Israeli Public Broadcasting Corporation. Eliyahu, of course, is a member of the Otzama Yehudit Jewish Power Party, led by National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. He said, "Our ultimate goal is to regain control of Gaza, including establishing settlements." Also this week, the terrorist-in-chief, ultra-Zionist land thief Daniela Weiss led a rabble of assorted thieves, with no doubt many murderers amongst them from the Israeli army, to the edge of the Gaza death camp, claiming that they wanted to get in and start building and, of course, kicking all the Palestinians out, those that they don't kill, as we can see now.
These Israelis want to resettle Gaza. They converged on its northern border in a march organized by the far-right Nakala settlement movement.
We will go here. The Gazans will scatter all over the world. They lost any link with this area on the 7th of October. This is the end of the chapter of Gazans here.
Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has denied plans for Gaza settlements, but members of his government openly support them. Several joined the march, including his far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. Ahead of the march, the military closed off areas close to Gaza, but did little to stop the activists from passing through roadblocks.
איפה שכבר גרנו פה לפני 21 שנה וגירשו אותנו, אנחנו רוצים לחזור לכאן, זה היה הבית שלנו, חלק ממנו אפילו גרנו פה פיזית, ואנחנו רוצים לחזור לכאן, בגדול.
Israel unilaterally dismantled its settlements in Gaza and withdrew from the territory in 2005. But since the Hamas terror attacks in October 2023, Israeli settlers and officials have pushed to resettle Gaza, an issue also expected to feature in the upcoming election. Last week, Israel's Defense Minister Israel Katz said that he intended to set up 3 Nahal military outposts in northern Gaza. For decades, these types of outposts usually paved the way for Israeli settlements, which are illegal under international law. Israel now occupies up to 70% of Gaza. This is beyond the 53% agreed under last year's US-brokered ceasefire. About 2 million Palestinians are pushed into an ever-shrinking fraction of Gaza's territory after a devastating war that has been described by some scholars and a UN Commission of Inquiry as genocide.
Mike, Brian, Patrick, uniquely depressing picture there. And of course, those pictures don't show, I've seen on social media, some of the most horrific images of burns victims. Apparently, the Israelis are now bombing with a kind of napalm gel that reaches 5,000 degrees centigrade. It's really absolutely obscene stuff.
Basil, thank you very much for that. Yes, it is tragic. Of course, it's tragic for the Palestinians. It's also tragic deaths amongst the Israeli soldiers, many of whom it is clear do not want to fight this type of warfare. Truly horrible situation. Let's just focus in now on the BBC. Are these things related? Well, sort of. I was fascinated to have a look at the BBC Group annual report and accounts for 2025-26. And according to the chairman, the BBC is a vital national asset in today's world. He had something else to say. Let's blow that up on screen. There is no other country in the world that has a media organisation like the BBC. We are an instrument of social cohesion in the world, where division, disruption, and distrust are becoming a way of life. So we've just seen what the BBC does and doesn't report over the war in the Middle East, and to claim that therefore cohesion is simply arrogance beyond belief, Patrick. But if we get deeper into the report, you find pages dedicated to this type of self-promotion. The BBC pursues truth with no agenda. It is independent, fearless, and fair. I think there are many people that would challenge that. Not least, this was a meme sent to me a couple of days ago. It's got a BBC stylized logo over dead bodies on the ground. And it said, "We don't cover Israel's crimes, we cover them up," which I think many people would agree with. But let's come back to the look at the BBC, because in these accounts, in very small print, you can see something very significant, and that's the BBC's real fear, and that is a fear of falling revenues. So what is this about? Well, if we bring up the actual box on screen, and it is a very small paragraph, the meat on the bones is this, a statement by the BBC that the outturn for 25-26 has been adversely impacted by lower than anticipated licence fee income. And the BBC's reported deficit was 121 million. If you read the language in this report, you will see the BBC is fearful that people are not supporting its rhetoric over it being independent. They are switching off, and they're doing so by stopping paying the licence fee. But there was something else that caught my eye in this report. It was in very small print. It was at the bottom of a section on BBC Media Action Charity. What did it have to say? Well, it said that BBC Media Action was going to launch a new podcast season for traumatized children in Gaza. Are there any traumatized children left, Patrick, or are they all dead? I found this unbelievably callous and cynical. But what was interesting was that the BBC document, suggested if you wanted more information on what BBC Media Action was going to do in Gaza, to have a look at their website. So I did go and visit BBC Media Action website to look about their initiative with traumatized children in Gaza. I could find nothing. I did find a statement bemoaning the fact that US aid had been cut to the BBC charity and therefore they were struggling. And I did find this response, BBC Media Action responds to Gaza attacks, but this is nothing to do with children. This is very big on journalists who've been killed in trying to report at what's been happening in Gaza. Now, I know that is an important issue, but we were on the trail of what the BBC was going to do for traumatized children. So the trail becomes very opaque very quickly, even though the BBC licence payer, the general public of the United Kingdom, are paying for this nonsense. I decided to go direct to BBC Media Action. So I've sent them this email asking for details of their initiative for traumatized children in Gaza. They have a 2-day response time for media inquiries. So next week, early next week, we should have a response from the BBC. But overall, when you look into their accounts, what you discover is vast amounts of money are totally opaque to public scrutiny because they are being used for BBC and Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office initiatives overseas, which clearly they do not want to deliver the details of those contracts to the public. So when you try and open up the BBC accounts to find where public money is going, it becomes ever more opaque. And to me, this is the start of very questionable activity by the BBC, and UK Column will be delving in more. Now, I've got to say that we're at the point where we need to finish today's news. We've covered a lot of very important topics. Basil, I know that you've normally got some have you missed slides for us. We'll include those in UK Column Extra in just a few minutes. But firstly, a huge thank you to our guest, Ben, for his excellent coverage on really the deep state. And of course, he will be with us in UK Column Extra. Basil, thank you for joining us. And Patrick, thank you for joining me here in the studio. Huge thank you to all our audience, wherever you are in the world. And it is your support that keeps UK Column going. So a huge thank you from all the team. UK Column News will be back at 1 o'clock on Monday. See you then. Bye-bye.